Yes, I hope you're doing well. Can you confirm that you can hear me?
You are loud and clear.
All right, and you can see the screen, right?
Yes.
Okay, so let's start. So last time I had promised to take you through the whole module, but I don't think I'll be able to do it today. I feel like already exhausted. So we'll cover the first lecture basically, which is Introduction to Reproductive Health. To reproductive epidemiology. So that is the lecture that we're going to cover. And the objectives for this session are that by the end of this session, you should be able to define reproductive epidemiology. You should be able to discuss the history of reproductive epidemiology. You should be able to explain the importance of reproductive epidemiology in public health. And then you should also be able to look at the factors that influence reproductive health outcomes. Okay, so we want to start this presentation by looking at health in general, what we understand by the term health. Health is a complex and faceted issue. This is to mean that it's very hard to have one comprehensive description of what health is. But of course, the widely accepted definition of health is the one by WHO, which states that health is a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. This is the most widely used definition of health. Uh, this is not to say that that definition does not have weaknesses. It has weaknesses. Some people say that um, it is not really a practical definition, and then others say that it is difficult to even operationalize the definition, putting that definition into practice. So those are some of the, the, the weaknesses or the criticisms to that definition. But that's basically what we have. That is what we usually use. That definition emphasizes that health is not one dimensional. There are many dimensions of health where we talk about physical health, social health, mental health, emotional health, spiritual health, then environmental health. So health has many dimensions. So physical health is basically about how our body functions, whether it is functioning normally and it is in normal structure. That is physical health. So this is where you start to say, if you go to the hospital, you say, my stomach is aching. Okay, so something is not working right with your body. And then social health is about your ability to interact with others. Socialization is very very important. You should have positive relations with others. So that is social health. And then the mental health is related to your ability to process information and act appropriately. Or you can say is mental health is related to the ability of coping up with the life pressures. Okay, if you can be able to cope up with life pressures, it's related to mental health. So usually mental health encompasses emotional health. But here we have it as a separate dimension. And then we have spiritual well-being, the belief in forces beyond humans is another dimension. So we need to relate health to public health and then relate epidemiology and reproductive health to public health. That is one of the missions that we want to do. So we have known what health is, and we have said that health is the complete state of well-being in terms of physical, mental, and social well-being without even not in the mere absence of disease. That's our definition of health. Now, if we want to improve health, we can improve health using communities as our target. Okay, we can use communities or populations as our target. So the act of improving health, promoting health, preventing disease in populations, that art and science of improving health, promoting health, preventing diseases in populations is what we call public health. So public health focuses on ensuring that populations are actually healthy, or we have what we call improved health outcomes. Now, um, public health uses an approach where you first need to understand the health status of the population you want to deal with, and then after assessing the health status, that is where you look at the diseases that are happening, you look at the behaviors, you look at the risk factors, you look at all the things that can actually influence health. That is the assessment part. And then from there, you need to select how you're going to respond to these health problems that you have found in a given community. So you can respond by designing a health policy, designing and implementing a health intervention. It can be making sure that people have latrines, people can wash their hands, they have access to clean water, or they have access to healthcare services, or they can access immunization services, a lot of things. Okay, so that is when you now design and implement, and then monitor and see if what you have implemented actually is is having a positive. What you have implemented has a positive impact on the populations. Okay, of course, you need to use the resources appropriately. So you need to really make sure that you have you manage cost. The interventions are cost effective and they're the appropriate ones and are accepted by the population. Okay, so basically that is what public health does. That we want to make sure that the health outcomes of populations are good. Okay, so the things that we do are that we first need to know what is happening. That is, you assess, and then you act, and then after acting, you assess, and that is basically evaluating, monitoring and evaluating, and then you go back. The cycle continues. Okay, after evaluating, you now see whether you need to readjust the plan, and then the cycle continues like that. Now, here comes the discipline of epidemiology. Now, the discipline that allows you to study what is happening within the population, to see what are those factors that cause disease. Who are the people having them? When do they have them? Why do they even have them? That discipline in public health that answers those questions is what we call epidemiology. And it comes from a Greek term that can be differentiated into epi, which is upon, demos, which is people, and then logos, which is basically study. Okay, so the epidemiology is a discipline that deals with the study of the distribution and determinants of health-related events in populations and their application to control health problems. Okay, so we want to know the factors that influence the health outcomes of certain populations. After knowing that, then we can be able to use that knowledge to be able to improve the health outcomes of that population. So that is the element of controlling the health problems. Okay, so epidemiology is a core discipline of public health. It's a major discipline of public health because it provides us with the tools to monitor the health status of populations, such that we can be able to detect problems and be able to quantify them and be able to know what factors cause these problems. And that is when we can now implement interventions to control these problems. So that is epidemiology and how it relates to public health. Now, we need to understand that definition further, the definition that we have provided. Of course, we said it is a study. The implication that it is a study is because it is based on scientific methods of scientific knowledge. It's a research subject. Okay, there is a body of research that is generated through scientific methods. That's why we call it a study. And then when we talk about distribution of health-related events, we are basically referring to the pattern and frequency. Who is having who are those that in a given population that are being affected by a particular problem, and how many are they? Okay, that is the distribution, frequency, and the pattern. Okay, so the frequency is how many people are having the health related event. When we talk about the health related event, we are meaning that those factors that are affecting health, it could be a risk factor. How many people are smoking? That is a health related event. How many people are having cancer? That is a healthy a disease. That is basically a health related event. So when you talk about health related event or events, we are referring to diseases or risk factors for given diseases, or basically exposures to certain risk factors. Okay, so we want to look at how many people in a given population are having or are developing a given health outcome or are exposed to a given risk factor. Now, when we talk about pattern, we are answering three things: who, where, and when, which is basically time, place, and person. So if you're talking about the health-related event being maternal mortality, women dying because of birth-related processes, we're going to look at, of course, we know that they are women, so we know the person. But what characteristic? Is it women who are aged between 17 to 25? Is it women of advanced age? That is towards menopause. So we want to know who these people are by their characteristic in terms of age, in terms of gender, in terms of other characteristics such as socioeconomic status. So we want to know them by place, which state, which county, which boma, and which am. Okay? We want to know, when do they usually actually die? When? Is it towards the end of the year? Is it during the rainy season? If it is during the rainy season, why? Maybe it is because they cannot access means of transport to go to the health facility. So that also answers. It's about the time. When? So is it a seasonal problem? Is it a problem that occurs throughout the year? Okay, so those key terms in the definition of epidemiology are important to understand: study, distribution, pattern, and then frequency. Okay, so the distribution has the pattern and the frequency, and we have looked at the frequency and then the pattern. Okay, and we have also looked at what we call health-related events. Another phrase that is also present within the definition is the concept of controlling the health problem. In epidemiology, we look at basically, usually, we look at three levels of prevention, or the focus is actually prevention, which is primary prevention, secondary prevention, and tertiary. We can add the primordial prevention and the quaternary prevention. Okay, so that is the control part in the definition of epidemiology. Okay, and then the other part that we also need to highlight is this term population. Population here. Population refers to a group of people that share a given characteristic. It could be a geographical location, or it could be a race. Okay, whether they are Africans or not. It could be an ethnic group. Okay, so when we talk about populations, that is what we mean. So we have basically looked at what epidemiology is. Now we can look at the history of epidemiology. If we understand the history of epidemiology, then that is when we shall be able to even explain the history of reproductive epidemiology. So epidemiology has a very rich history. It is not very easy to summarize the history of epidemiology on this single slide. But the key things that you really need to note that are related to epidemiology, the history of epidemiology. One is the understanding of what contributes to disease. Okay, or what causes diseases. Of course, there are several theories on what causes diseases since ancient time. Okay, so the way we understand diseases these days is different from how diseases were understood in the ancient times. Okay, so we are going to look at the major events or the major contributors to the personalities who contributed to our understanding of what causes disease and what interventions they actually participated in order to control diseases. So when we talk about the control of diseases, the historical perspective about the control of diseases, or being an epidemiology, we can start from Hippocrates, who observed that, you see, diseases are related to the environmental conditions. Okay? He's the first person to observe that. And this was, of course, happening at a time when the understanding of the role of microbes in causing diseases was not known. Okay, when the discovery of microbes such as bacteria, viruses, and the rest was not there. So he suggested that environmental conditions contribute to diseases. Okay, and then there was also time uh, where uh, the, the the understanding of what causes disease was related to a vapor, the miasma theory of disease causation, which is that vapor from filthy places is the one that is responsible for diseases. So now, by that time, the emphasis was on maintaining sanitary conditions. So this is where you have municipal councils having now sewage systems, so on. Okay, and then of course, along the way, the germ theory came in. Okay, the germ theory came in. This is where people like Robert Koch did discover that tuberculosis is caused by a microorganism. Okay, so this is where now the understanding that the communicable diseases are caused by micro infectious agents started to be accepted. Okay, so issues to do with discovery of the microscope, issues to do with the discovery of antibiotics, issues to do with vaccinations. This contributed a lot in understanding um, uh, what contributes to diseases and what can be done to stop these diseases. Okay, now we moved to a generation where now the the communicable diseases are actually well understood, and those interventions to do with the environmental sanitation, drinking clean water, vaccinations, and the rest became very, very important. So in this slide, I picked out a few of the notable people who really contributed a lot in epidemiology. Of course, this list is not exclusive. Um, what is regarded as the first uh, uh, interventional or the first trial was conducted by James Lind, who discovered that um, um, a disease called scurvy was related to the fact that people did not have vitamin C in their body, and this was basically a trial that was conducted on men on the ship. Okay, so that is very, very important in epidemiology. Why? Because epidemiology basically relies on studies to reach a given conclusion. So we look at in epidemiology, we look at what exposures are there and how are they linked to a health event or what we call health outcome. So so he discovered that those who are on the ship were not having foods that had vitamin C, and therefore they developed scurvy. Okay, so that is basically regarded as one of the first trials. And then the next person that I can talk about is John Snow, who is basically regarded as the father of epidemiology. He discovered that people who were dying of the cholera epidemic in London died because they were drinking water that was from a contaminated source. This was purely an observation that he made based on data that he collected from. So he characterized those who died of cholera. Where were they drinking water from? So he did, he had a map, he mapped out and discovered that those who are actually dying of cholera were getting water from a water company that had its water source contaminated. And then when the point of contamination was discovered, and then the arm of the water pump removed, that means that no water was obtained from that water point anymore, then the number of people who are dying of cholera reduced. So that is John Snow. So much of the work in epidemiology relies on such an understanding that you use data about the health problem and then discover what is really happening, discover the connection between the exposure and the health outcome of interest, and then act. So that removing the arm of that water point was the action. And then you saw that the number of cholera deaths reduced. So that is basically the basis of epidemiology. Epidemiology relies a lot on data and carrying out. You carry out scientific studies of what we call epidemiological studies, and then be able to draw the right conclusions, and then act the recommendations, and then see what happens. So that is the epidemiology way of doing things, which we can say the epidemiologic approach, or we can call it the epidemiology process. First, understand the health problem by defining what it is, categorize it, classify it, and then you can have a suggestion of what really what this health event is related to. That is, if people are dying of cholera, what are the possible causes of this cholera outbreak? And then now you need to really determine whether indeed your suggestion is actually correct. So that is when now you carry out an epidemiologic study. Okay, and then using the data that you have collected, you can be able to draw the connection between the exposure and the health outcome of interest, and then use that information now to institute measures to control the health problem. So that is the epidemiological approach, or the epidemiological way of doing things. So from our history, we saw that epidemiology is basically, it has history. Epidemiology has history in communicable diseases. Okay. However, now it has moved, or it has evolved from only focusing on epidemiological diseases to look at other health problems. So we look at behaviors, we look at risk factors, we look at non-communicable diseases. Okay, so epidemiology does not only look at diseases per se, it looks at other factors or other issues that have impact on health. And that is where we look at behaviors, that is where we look at even events that are happening. It could be issues to do with environmental issues, environmental factors that cause health problems. It can be genetic issues, genetic population genetics influencing population outcomes, population health outcomes, and things like that. So we look at we don't only look at diseases, we also look at the other factors that are associated with health states. Okay, so epidemiology is very, very important because we use the knowledge that we get from epidemiology to be able to control diseases, and we basically use epidemiological study designs to be able to understand these health problems and be able to know whether we can call the health problems as endemic or epidemic or pandemics or even just an outbreak. Okay, so having understood what epidemiology is as a discipline, just that small description, we now move to a more narrow branch of epidemiology, which we call reproductive epidemiology. Okay, so in epidemiology, we look at, in our definition, if you remember, it was about um, health-related events, health-related events. Now here, we are narrowing it down to events that are related to reproductive health. And basically, the difference between the earlier definition and this one is the fact that we have an element of reproductive health outcomes. So the similarities are that we basically look at the distribution and determinants. That is the same field. I mean, they share the same phrases, but the difference comes in the distribution and determinants of reproductive health outcomes. It means that we look at populations and we use that information to control or to improve reproductive health outcomes. So the definition is basically the same, but the focus here is on reproductive health outcomes. When we talk about reproductive health outcomes, we are basically referring to what we call positive reproductive health outcomes and negative reproductive health outcomes. When we talk about positive reproductive health outcomes, we are basically referring to people attaining the best possible health outcomes or optimal health outcomes. So optimal reproductive health outcomes, you don't want to be having mothers dying because of maternal related issues. You want to have people having babies when they want. So optimal use of family planning. You don't want to have people suffering from STIs. You don't want to have people having a lot of, high prevalence of issues to do with HIV. You don't want to see issues to do with sexual violence, all of things. Those are the ones that reflect positive reproductive health outcomes. So poor reproductive health outcomes are related to having low family planning usage, high maternal mortality, high cases of sexual violence, low attendance of antenatal, and a lot of other things. Okay, teenage pregnancies, those are poor reproductive health outcomes. Okay, so we basically look at who are those, or we look at the W's that we earlier on talked about. Who, where, when. Okay, and then of course you need to be able to relate, or you need to be able to explain that is the other why. Why is it that people who have had female genital mutilation are likely to have poor pregnancy outcomes? So that why part is also there. So you use that knowledge that you have gathered from the W's to be able to institute the right procedures to improve the outcomes. So reproductive health is concerned is concerned with looking at reproductive health issues. Okay, now when we talk about reproductive epidemiology, it's the same things. It's the same reproductive health issues. So we look at all the problems that I've earlier on listed: maternal mortality, teenage pregnancy, high prevalence of STIs, including HIV and AIDS, low family planning usage. You have a number of cancers, a number of congenital diseases, all of things. Those are reproductive health issues. And that's the focus of reproductive epidemiology. So basically, reproductive epidemiology, we look at the pattern or the distribution, which is basically including, which basically includes the pattern and frequency, and the determinants of these problems that we have talked about. Okay, so we look at those. So we look at what actually results into these health problems or reproductive health problems. We analyze and then be able to know these factors, identify these factors, which one have negative impact, which one have protective protective impact. So earlier on, we talked about the epidemiologic process or the epidemiologic approach. It's what you can call the scientific approach or the scientific method, which is basically that you see a problem, okay, and then you want to address this problem. So you may say, okay, there is a high prevalence of female genital mutilation cases. We have a number of people who have had who have undergone female genital mutilation. That is an observation that you have made. And then you are concerned that this female genital mutilation is associated with negative maternal outcomes. So you form what you call a hypothesis, which is step number 2 in the scientific method. The first is an observation, which is basically you have seen that you have an increased number of female genital mutilation. So the numbers are high. And then you postulate that these numbers are likely the one that cause an increase in the number of poor maternal health outcomes. So you have basically formed a hypothesis, which is basically a statement that a well-educated guess that you are making. So you're linking up the exposure and then the health outcome of interest. So the exposure here is the female genital mutilation, and then you have the poor maternal health outcome, which can be maybe excessive bleeding, which can be the need for episiotomy, cesarean section, and things like that, depending on your study. Now you basically now go and carry out a study. This is where basically we are saying that you're collecting data. You're carrying out a study to collect data to really find out if that statement, that hypothesis is correct. So you analyze the data and you will see that those who have undergone maybe female genital mutilation have 20% chances of having a poor maternal health outcome compared to those who have not. Okay, they have a higher chance compared to those who have not. And then that is when now you can say that female genital mutilation should be decampaign. So that is the scientific method in reproductive epidemiology. So if we do things that way, we'll understand how certain reproductive health outcomes are brought about. What are the contributors to reproductive health problems? So, and then we shall also be able to know the patterns. That is, we'll be able to know whether the rates are increasing or the rates are decreasing. This is very important for planning purposes. Okay, so having known the problem, where it is happening, why it is happening, when is it happening, and that's when you can now put measures, which can include policies and other interventions to make sure that you prevent the problem from occurring. And then, of course, it allows us to be able to see the intervention that we have put in place, is it bringing any good results or not? Okay. You will also be able to identify the populations or the subpopulations that are having bigger or having poor reproductive health outcomes compared to others. That is a case of health disparities. Okay, so planning and resource allocation also becomes very, very key. So what is the history of reproductive epidemiology? The history of reproductive health, reproductive epidemiology is in a way also related to the history of epidemiology. But the key things is that now we are basically narrowing it to the reproductive health aspect. So, in the ancient civilizations, of course, people practiced some level of contraception. So, mainly, people relied on plant products to control contraception. However, as the field of medicine advanced, now studies were conducted to understand fertility, maternal mortality, and infant mortality. Okay, so that is where now issues to do with understanding how these processes occur and what factors are related to this or influence these processes. Well, that is when this knowledge actually started to advance. And then in the 20th century, this is where the development of vital statistics and the birth registries started to take place. So that means it allowed for data collection, quality data collection to be done, and therefore birth outcomes could be understood. Like it became very easy to understand the causes of infant mortality and things like that because of this data that is being collected. Okay, so this data also allows the understanding between maternal factors and birth outcomes. Okay, now in the late 20th century, the understanding that women should have their reproductive health rights respected, and they should be able to make their own decisions about matters pertaining to reproductive health. This is when that thinking actually started to take shape. And then again, issues to do with in the late 20th century, issues to do with the HIV pandemic or epidemic became very key in shaping the discussions around reproductive health. Okay, and now epidemiological studies are now being conducted in relation to matters to do with maternal HIV, transmission of HIV, and sexual health. Now, the way we understand reproductive health and what actually drives the narratives is the recognition that reproductive health is an important element that should be that people should actually focus on. So it is part of the global health agendas. Okay, so issues to do with maternal health, family planning, and reproductive health rights are very, very, very key in this century. Okay. And then also that is when we have started to look at issues to do with disparities, where we have vulnerable populations which are or that are having poor uh, reproductive health outcomes, and making sure that we actually address the factors that relate or that bring or that contribute to poor reproductive health outcomes. So the last part of this discussion will basically focus on what are those factors that contribute to reproductive health outcomes, whether positive or negative. So we basically say that or reflect on the fact that the environment has various aspects that influence reproductive health. The physical, chemical, biological, and psychological environments play a very big part. When we talk about the physical environment, we are referring to the natural surrounding, okay, the geographical factors, the climate, and exposures to natural hazards. Of course, this can contribute in reproductive health through access. If you have a highly hilly place that makes mobility very difficult, that it will influence access to reproductive health. Okay, extreme weather events can contribute to different health outcomes, which are basically negative. Okay, so physical environment can contribute to positive or negative health, and therefore poor reproductive health outcomes. And then exposures to chemicals that can cause damage to the cells, especially during pregnancy. This can cause what we call congenital disorders. Okay, we have what we call tetragenic substances. These are substances which, when a woman who is pregnant is exposed to, they can have or they can result into congenital disorders in the unborn child. And then we have biological factors, such as organisms or pathogens or vectors. When they infect, for example, when they infect a pregnant mother, they are most likely going to transmit an infection to the unborn child. And this is the case for issues to do with like HIV, Zika virus, and others. And then we look at what we call the psychosocial environment. A very supportive environment is very good for mental well-being. And if a woman is not supported, while pregnant especially, they are likely to have postpartum depression or postpartum psychosis. These are mental disorders that are associated with psychological support or even social support. We can look at this environment in two ways, with the inner and the outer environment. Okay, the inner environment being the well-being of the person and how the actions of this person or even their genetic constitution or their biological makeup can constitute or can result into poor reproductive health outcomes. Okay, so issues to do with personal behavior, genetic makeup or predisposition can contribute to certain reproductive health diseases. When we talk about the environmental factors, these are the ones that we basically looked at when we mentioned about the physical environment. Okay, the the topography or the geography, the community that you're staying, even the workplace, and things like that can contribute a lot in reproductive health outcomes. Another way of looking at it can be what we call the ambient environment. Okay, ambient environment, where you live and where you work. These are examples of ambient environments. They can also contribute to reproductive health outcomes. Okay, we want to end there unless you have any questions.